this afternoon, which is seeding the Latin spirit in classical music. So my first question to all of you is, do you think that Latin America has a signature or imprint in the classical music? Please, anyone can join.
Yes, of course. Yes, we do have a particular sign, a particular signature in music in general and in classical music especially. The way we approach music, the way we feel music, and the youth that is embedded in Latin American orchestral and choral movements all around the continent is significant and is very, very prominent around the world. I think that's the result of a number of contributions. One of those very prominently is the work of José Antonio Abreu in Venezuela, because that has spread out for a great number of years, maybe 40 years now, and has created a movement that now is translated into highly professionally trained musicians, full of passion and full of social commitment. I think those two things are what we can announce the future of classical music is in Latin America.
Thank you, Juan Antonio.
I would like to say that no doubt in what we understand as classical music today, in the modern heritage of classical music, no doubt. But I would like to also remind people that also early music in Baroque music, if we say Spanish, Portuguese, Italian music, was very influenced also by Latin American rhythms post-colonialism or during the colonialism, that they would bring certain instruments, bring their rhythms and dances, they would be adopted in Latin America, and then they would be transformed. They would return to Europe with those ingredients, with those new colors. So I think it goes back much further than we usually are aware of.
Yeah, I agree, Luciana. It's amazing, huh? How much we're related, and we don't even know it sometimes, no?
Yes, the dances, especially dance movement and sounds, and the transformation of certain instruments and rhythms, just the mix of rhythms, I think, are a fascinating pot that we have no idea how underestimated it is.
If I can add my 2 cents here from a Brazilian perspective, I agree with Maestro Cuéllar, I agree with Luciana, and hello you too. I didn't have a chance to say hello before. But I would say certainly we have a very strong heritage. However, especially I think for us Brazilians, when we think about the Latin American musical heritage, it's still pretty much unknown to ourselves. I mean, we know, of course, some key figures, but there is an enormous amount of music which is still to be discovered, first of all, by ourselves. And also, I would say, certainly, the growth in music education, spearheaded by El Sistema, but with so many social projects in every country now, at work, this is certainly notable. But I would say, if we want to think of Latin America as the future of classical music, and I would like to think that, our responsibility is to make sure that the future of classical music at some point becomes the present. Because right now it's just a hope. I mean, we have possibilities, we have enormous possibilities for having a strong presence in the world, as Maestro Cuéllar put it, as the future of classical music. But right now, the future is still the future. There's still a long way to go. I feel in music education in general, in the development of a real Latin American identity, which is perceived by all of us. And if I speak from a Brazilian perspective, the mere distance in language is an impediment, as we can see. But not only that, I feel we could have much, much greater integration. I mean, I'm particularly grateful for the invitation to be part of this forum, because we feel we should develop institutional, educational, and artistic partnerships to a much greater degree than we have done so in the past. In the case of the São Paulo Symphony Orchestra, it's certainly the case that we have established partnerships with other orchestras in Europe, in the United States. We have co-commissions regularly with many other orchestras, but not in our own region. For a number of reasons, and we can go into them if you're interested in discussing it. But I feel it's our responsibility to develop these partnerships, to come up with creative projects that involve institutions in Chile, in Colombia, in Peru, in Argentina, in Uruguay together, so that we really build a Latin American classical music identity that can think of itself as such and can be a strong force in classical music in the future. And let's hope that the future is not too far away.
Yeah, wow, this is wonderful. I have questions on the back of what each of you have shared. If I may, Ali, is that okay? Yeah. Because one of the things, I was living in Chile for 13 years and I came back to Australia about 2 years ago. And I worked with Angelica, who is one of the three of us who put this together and the festival. And Angelica also has Curatoria de Talentos, no? Was the first one in Chile. And even just to establish that without any infrastructure, right, in Chile, that was to support the artist in professionality, or professionalism. And I think one of the challenges is also one of the beautiful things. So being an expat, but I didn't live in the expat community, I lived in the Chilean community. One of the things that I saw, and you can always see better when you come from outside, right? You can't see yourself so easily. So as an Australian, I don't see myself or Australia as easily as I could see when I was there. And there's some things in common with Australia, which is the sort of below in the Southern Hemisphere. There's a sense of a lower self-esteem in the Southern Hemisphere, though we look to the Northern Hemisphere, even though in Australia we're a first world nation. But one of the things that we noticed a lot is that, even all that you were saying about what the Latin American musician, artist, human being, spirit, culture brings to the world, but it becomes somehow it's not valued, as you said, Arthur, by ourselves. I'll put myself there because, one of the things that changed my life, my world, was to experience, I could get emotional, I'm starting to feel, to experience this beautiful sense of heart, and that very often family and community and the other comes before even the self, which I think can be wonderful and a little damaging at times too. But I think this sense of not valuing what is on offer, and especially now in the world, in a world that's divided, in a world that's full of anxiety and depression and all of these very strong things, to value what is community, to value inclusivity, which you see even in music in Latin America, the different kinds of music as they cross over, and move together, and the colors and the. So for me, a big question, Arthur, to say, you know, okay, how do you bring the future now? I think is recognition, which is, you know, what has been mentioned, the recognition of what Latin American artists have to offer the world. So it's not like kind of trying to fit in to a better world and be accepted. It's like, I'm coming, I'd love to learn, and this is who I am and what I bring from my world. And I would ask the three of you, do you agree? Do you see that? And in your experience in working maybe also with other Northern Hemisphere cultures or wherever, but do you experience that value that the artists from this part of the world, Latin America, can bring and the impact it has? So it's a big context and question, and I love to hear your experiences and insights. Luciana, your mic's open and you're nodding, and you're living in the Northern Hemisphere. Talk to us.
Yeah, very gladly so. I feel very identified with what you say, not so much because of what I felt, but because of what people would say to me. Be careful, don't mix classical music, do that, because if they know that you do Latin American music as well, maybe they won't, you lose kind of the classical status somehow. But for me, it was never an option. And I think there, it depends on the generations as well. It would be the older generations that would want to classify, that would want everything to be in their spot. And my generation already was already with the tuning and the zapping. It's perfectly okay to go from a Beethoven concert to then listen to jazz and then listen to bossa nova and listen to Nordic folk music and klezmer, and you know, I didn't understand why I had to choose. I understand that there is a lot of work behind each thing. You don't take it lightly, but I never valued one thing more or less. Then I wanted to say also that I think it's very important that what we talk about, what we're talking about also in regards of education. I think we are behind in education, but I'm sure that many composers that are listening now, especially Latin American composers, are probably trying to scream at us saying like, we are trying, we are here, we are mixing all these elements. Also the piece that we're going to listen to at 6 of Zamora, Carlos Zamora, I haven't heard that particular piece, but I know Carlos, and I know he has always wanted to include Chilean material. And we know this from Latin American composers since long. So I think contemporary composers are there. We have material. We need the space. And then the theaters maybe, and my colleagues can talk much better than me of the reasons, but it's scary because of the audience still. We don't, there is a lot of art in how to mix the programs so that the people feel welcome and also feel that their own music can have a classical expression or have a place on a classical stage. Because in my case, I don't really agree with making folk music classical necessarily. But I think we can very easily share the stage. I think the mix can be more contemporary, but when we go to folk music, it can also be on the same stage. That shouldn't be a problem. So the programming is another issue. And education in school, education on stage, but I think the material has been there for long. Both the artists, composers, and the audience for sure.
Wonderful.
There's a huge effort done by a huge number of composers over the last 50 or 60 years in Latin America to mix up elements from our cultures into the world of classical music, and also to bring the classical Northern European, North American world to our places. So we have been connecting with all the time with Europe and the United States for the sake of, you know, finding better education, finding better opportunity. But as Arthur has said before, we haven't looked so much into our communities, our own Latin American community. And I think that's the step that goes for us in the next years. One of the things that surprised me through the pandemic was that with orchestras like the Colombian National Symphony Orchestra or other orchestras like that in Latin America, we could do things more flexibly and more freely than other orchestras in the world could do, because we are not so structured. We don't have those very strong unions of musicians. We don't have all those bylaws. We don't have all those limits. So we could do creative things way beyond what is normally accepted for symphony orchestras in other latitudes. So I think that very thing that kind of we have all in common in Latin America, which is a little bit of disorder, distructured things. We all struggle for the money. We all struggle for opportunities. We all struggle all the time for finding better paths, better ways. And that struggle, that very thing that we all share, is something that is going to take us somewhere else. So before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, we were trying to live in a music world. I'm talking about symphony orchestras now, that hasn't been changed much from the 19th century till our days. We do the same kind of routine, rehearsal routine. We do basically the same concert routine. We have the same protocols and the same staging that orchestras have had for 200 years. And the pandemic taught us that that can change and that should change, because that formality, that stiffness of the symphonic world was kind of losing relevance in our context. So now I can see different orchestras and chamber music groups and soloists doing things that were unthinkable 2 years ago. So that's why I say that this is on our side now. We who don't have such structured things and we don't have this long-term planning that symphony orchestras in Europe have, or this very organized and very well managed famous chamber European ensembles. When these came up, they were paralyzed. We in Latin America are good improvisers, and we can move things much quicker than other people in other latitudes can. So this is kind of paradoxical, but our main way of doing things that we don't like of ourselves is what is getting us out of this trap.
May I again offer my 2 cents here? I agree and I disagree at the same time, and I'll explain why. No doubt there's a spirit of freedom and improvisation which is characteristic, and we share that. However, and I'm speaking here on behalf of the São Paulo Symphony, and I know that even within Brazil, the amount of planning and organization that we have managed to do for the past 15 years or so is not the rule. But as it happens, just as a statement of fact, we do have the same kind of long-term planning that any other prime American or European orchestra would have. Even during the pandemics, I'm now planning 2023. I mean, I'm just giving you the facts. I mean, the orchestra has a very large structure. We have a 32-week season. We have 9,000 subscribers we must attend to. So it's not so easy to change things so quickly, because we do have a successful operation here. And we have a symphony orchestra, a string quartet, a symphonic choir. By the way, an invitation for everybody. Our choir tonight participates in the opening of Davos, the World Economic Forum. We did a project with Mary Alsop and groups around the world, and it's already been shown live, and it will be repeated at 9 p.m. tonight. It will be on YouTube. So we have the São Paulo Symphony, we have the choir, a youth choir, a children's choir, an academy with 44 students, a string quartet, and a chamber series. It's a lot. I mean, we do almost 200 concerts a year. If we don't have long-term planning, none of this would happen. And we also manage the Winter Festival in Campos do Jordão. That's another 150 concerts every July. So we must be organized, and we do run things more or less like any other international organization. However, having said that, I do agree with Juan Antonio. During the pandemics, I'm seeing colleagues in America and Europe essentially paralyzed, either because they cannot do things because of the protocols, they are forbidden to do anything, to open the theaters or to play live concerts, or else because they do feel paralyzed by the circumstances. And I have to say, we started doing digital activity 2 days after the quarantine was declared here, and we have not stopped. I mean, we have reached almost 13 million people by now. So I do agree with you that we have to see these circumstances as possibilities. We're doing new things we had never thought we would. Musicians playing at home, collective videos and so on. Then we started doing digital concerts without an audience, and now we are doing concerts with an audience, but under very different circumstances. Shorter programs, social distancing protocols on stage and so on. We have not stopped. We're playing every week as much as we can. I do think that I wanted to ask you a question, Juan Antonio. How much Argentinian music, how much Brazilian music, how much Mexican music has your orchestra played in the last 3 seasons? I know the answer, probably very little. It's the same here.
You're exactly right. And we have performed, of course, but the proportion between traditional symphonic music from Europe, especially, in contrast to with the amount of Latin American original music is
very small.
I mean, it's very shameful. You know, it's kind of embarrassing.
I think it's embarrassing for all of us. And I think it's about time we start doing something about it. So I'll tell you one thing we're trying to do. We have a strategic document, you know, what we would like to achieve in the next 10 years. And one of the prime aims is to have a larger presence in Latin America as an institution, but also to have a much larger presence of Latin American culture and Latin American music here in our own programming. It doesn't mean we're going to play Latin American music in every concert, of course, but we will have a different kind of focus. I'll give you a very concrete example. In 2021, assuming we can do concerts, of course, we are speaking at the worst possible time. But if things go more or less well, we will have a Piazzolla 100 cycle, you know, to celebrate the centenary. Symphonic programs, chamber programs, all kinds of things. Pablo Ziegler is coming, all kinds of concerts throughout the season. Our visiting composer, we always have 1 or 2 visiting composers every year, will be Esteban Benzecri, Argentinian. We will play his new piano concerto. Sergio Tiempo will be the soloist. We have a larger number of soloists from Latin America, I think, than we have ever had. The artist in residence, which is something we always have every season, will be Gabriela Montero. We are welcoming Sergio Tiempo, but also Nelson Gerner, choral conductor Silvana Valesi, Carlos Miguel Prieto, Giancarlo Guerrero. So several Latin American artists, not from Brazil. Brazilian music is still a different thing, and it has a special place for us. But we are trying actively to take steps to get to know this repertoire and to give space to Latin American artists within our own context here in São Paulo. And I think if we all start doing this, if we all start realizing that we must create opportunities for Latin American music to be heard, for Latin American artists to take part in our own seasons, that in itself could be a big change. We have difficulties. Planning is one of them because the schedule is very different in different parts of the continent. And I think one large difficulty is ignorance of the repertoire. We just don't know it, and it's difficult to have access to scores.
I think that's one of the major issues in Latin America.
Yes.
That, you know, finding scores, finding the actual materials for performance is very difficult. And we don't have so well-established publishers in Latin America that could make that easier for us. Or sometimes it's just too expensive. I mean, these publishers are charging whatever they like for a performance. Even now, I mean, in the middle of the pandemic, we were trying to do something very standard, very super standard for Latin America, which is the Ginasteras suite from La Estancia. Very common. You know, it was very difficult to get it in the middle of the pandemic. They wanted to ship the music as normal. They didn't send PDF files. I mean, they are kind of in a different moment in history. So, and that's talking about one of the most prominent, well-sold, highly established Latin American composers. Now try finding like, for example, we programmed this year in the orchestra the concertino for piano and orchestra of Camargo Guarnieri. We had to do a very intense search to see who is the owner of that material and where it's published and who distributes it and who's the company that we need to pay for this. We managed to do it, but it was unnecessarily difficult. Now let me one of the most important Brazilian composers. Yeah, it's difficult.
A very practical word here. I will ask Alejandra to share our emails among ourselves. The São Paulo Symphony Orchestra has its own publishing house. We publish essentially every work that we commission, 4 to 6 Brazilian commissions a year, and also works by past composers like Camargo Guarnieri himself. We have published some of his symphonies. We have published Mignoni and many others. If any of you ever need any help, please just write to me. I will put you in charge with our chief librarian. Nobody knows this subject better than him, and he'll be glad to help. A lot of this music is now with us, and we share the materials. We offer them for very, very reasonable amounts of money, virtually nothing. And we have an extensive catalog. Over 200 works are published. So, I mean, you can go online and check the catalog. But let's just be practical. This is the beginning of something that could be helpful. You can always just write to me. And I would love for us to be able at some point to create a digital forum where all of these works by Argentinian, Uruguayan, Chilean, Colombian, Venezuelan, Peruvian composers, at least excerpts of these works could be shown online. That we could all go and hear excerpts, and then we could contact people. Because if I'm trying to program Latin American music, the number one difficulty is getting to know the repertoire and finding the scores. It's much, much easier to find Finnish music than it is to find Colombian music if you're living in São Paulo. Swedish music would be much, much easier. So we have to find ways to get ourselves organized and help each other promote Latin American music. We're not going to solve this here, but we should be able to give some thought to it and come up with concrete ideas.
Arthur, I think this is the first step to do this, no? You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation about that we, in Latin America, we still don't find a way to work together, no? Yes. why do you think is that? Because I'm thinking, you know, Juan Antonio, that you mentioned about how expensive are the renting parts, no? And I'm thinking, well, if in Sao Paulo, Luciana Mancini comes to sing, maybe she can be in Santiago, in Bogota, in Medellin. Do you do this among all of you, or not?
Well, Alejandra, many times when we book an artist, you know, the agents will ask me for recommendations of other orchestras, other institutions in the region, because it would make sense, of course. The prime difficulty is what Maestro Cuéllar said. The patterns of scheduling are very different, and they are different for very serious reasons. The institutions are not stable. In many of our countries, people don't know whether they can fulfill an agreement 2 years from now. They hope they can, but they cannot actually sign a contract because so many things change so quickly. The political situation can be so unstable that it's crucial that the institutions have enough stability to be able to plan things 2 or 3 years in advance for this to be able to happen. Because the artist, the great pianist, the great singers, when Luciana is planning her season for 2022, 2023, I'm sure she would love to come to Chile and then Brazil and Argentina and Peru and Colombia. But who in these different countries is prepared to offer her a week in October 2023 with any degree of certainty?
It would be so much easier if there was a network, because it would be cheaper and it would be more ecological.
Certainly. We do this here with a few other orchestras in Brazil, very few who have that kind of planning. So sometimes an artist will come and play in São Paulo and then will play, say, in Belo Horizonte or maybe in Rio de Janeiro. That's about it. But it's not easy because the institutions...
But is there a network?
Personal, let's say. I mean, it works because we know people, and you know, people will write to me and say, you know, do you know who's coming in, you know, next year that could be of interest to us? I think, you know, in the continent as a whole, we suffer from problems which are much greater. I mean, we're just a symptom. We ourselves are lucky enough in São Paulo, but that is not always the case with every orchestra in Brazil, certainly not. We are lucky enough that we have had enough stability. With, you know, with a certain amount of risk-taking, we have enough stability that we can plan at least 2 years ahead. We are managed by a foundation. I mean, my contract is with the São Paulo Symphony Orchestra Foundation. And this foundation has a 5-year contract with the state. So essentially, the state of São Paulo is responsible for 50% of the budget. And the foundation must come up with the other 50%. Because we are a foundation, we have certain freedoms to find sponsors, for instance, which the state itself wouldn't have. We have certain latitudes that a purely 100% state orchestra would not have. And at the same time, we are obliged to come up with 50% of the budget. It's been working so far. It's been 15 years. Our contract has been renewed twice, and we expect it will be renewed again for the next 5 or possibly 10 years. And it's this kind of stability which has enabled us to do long-term planning, which would be crucial for what Alejandra has suggested. It seems a very practical thing to do, but in practice it's very difficult. If I write to Juan Antonio and say, could we have Luciana in October 2023? I'm sure he would love to, but would he actually be able to plan with that much anticipation? I don't know. I mean, you can tell us.
It's difficult, and also it is difficult for the Bogota Philharmonic, which is more I mean, it's 100% funded by the government of the city. But it's difficult because all those commitments have to do with resources, and those are public resources that are annually given. So it could be almost impossible to book someone for 3 years in advance. However, we with this National Symphony are struggling to make things different for us, because that's one of the disadvantages that we actually have, is that, I mean, extreme and very stiff planning, like it happens in some of the US, for example, orchestras, it's difficult because they are not flexible. And in situations like this that we are living, flexibility is a must. But now the other side of the coin is dramatic. I mean, if we cannot have some long-term planning, it's very difficult to insert an orchestra into the global circulation of top artists. And top artists might want to sing or to play with, well, a symphony like the Colombian, but their schedule is not, I mean, it does not allow for changes, last minute changes, or to just come to Colombia to play a concert in with 2 months in advance. That's difficult.
Yeah.
So we need to change those things, and we need to kind of teach governments how this world works, because there has to be a solution. And I think the solution that they found in Sao Paulo 15 years ago is a good one. We now are the National Symphony Orchestra now is an association with the same figure. So I think we can follow the path that the Sao Paulo Orchestra has followed. But yes, certainly for most of the orchestra, I would talk by, all the regional symphony orchestras in Colombia don't know if they are going to have the budget for the second half of this year, right?
But at the same time, it would be so much more expensive. It is so much more expensive when you do take the artist one per one each country. I know this. I went to Australia actually on this basis. I sang with different orchestras, and it was even the same piece. And we were 2 from Europe, and there were 2 soloists from Australia in Brisbane first, and then 2 others in Melbourne. And I don't know, I guess there has to be a network where the communication is key, and solidarity. Because many are like, okay, we have this artist and we don't want the others then to have this artist, which I believe also ecologically is obsolete by now. If somebody travels from far away, and not even me from traveling from Europe, but somebody from Chile to Sao Paulo, or from Mexico to Bogota, but these are also expenses that when they are shared with neighboring countries can really work to our advantage. So it's more than the money, it's really the organization.
So, something that I would like to add, thank you, Luciana, because that was my question. No? So it seems to me that all programming has to do with budget. So it's interesting for me because, of course, I don't deal with that part of what I do, no? But maybe what I'm going to say might be too idealistic, but I'm curious because for me it will be, okay, let's plan 3 seasons from now. I want this, and it doesn't matter money, because this is what I want, no? And as like you say, Juan Antonio, the feeling that I have is that if I planned thinking only about the budget, it's never going to happen. But if I dream of something that I would love to have, I'm sure you will all figure it out so it will happen, no?
Yes, the problem is, I mean, it's a combination between the budget and the, say, the administrational possibilities that public sector allows. So the Sao Paulo is a good example because it's a combination between public resources and privately funded resources. So the idea of a program in like 2 or 3 years in advance is ideal for the operation of an institution like an orchestra. The problem is to commit resources beyond the year that is been approved. So if for instance, if you have private sector money for long-term goal programming, you could do that, and then having the public sector money pay for the orchestra's operation, you know, paying the musicians and paying all the salaries of the administration and all the operational aspects. If that combination works, then you have private money that you can commit to long-term programming, and then you have public money that is responsible for the operation of the basics of the orchestra. So that's a good path to follow. But unfortunately, most of the orchestras in our latitude are 100% funded by the state, and that's a complication when you want to program in a long term.
Can I jump in here, because I as I listen to you all, and you know, we're talking about sembrando, seeding Latin American spirit, right? And it's so interesting to me when what you said, Ali, about, you know, let's dream what we would love and then work out how would we make that happen. And I think this conversation is really so clearly highlighting that the current systems or kind of quasi systems that are in place aren't serving the sort of future that everybody's saying is really we need to move to. So then the questions are about exactly as you're saying, Juan Antonio, how do we move towards something that's more agile? And because clearly there are problems, but those problems aren't going to change on their own. There has to be some driving force, and it has to come from a desire that there's a vision of something bigger and better. And I want to kind of close a little bit with the orchestral part now, because whilst Luciana's here, I want to hear a little bit about, before we finish, and we're nearly done, about what it's like bringing, living, breathing, bringing the Latin American spirit and being in Europe, and also valuing where you've come from, because I've heard from many artists over the years that when they go there, for some of them it's really hard culturally. They're without family, without network, and that's such a big part of that they love, and they return back to this part of the world even though the opportunities are not so available for them. So if just to close the orchestral part, and then I'm going to hand over to you, Luciana, to lead this next closing part of the conversation. When Ali was chief conductor of a particular orchestra, and she wanted to do a process of visioning, engagement, what will be the future? You know, what would you like to do, experience, play? What would be the vision of our orchestra in the next 3-5 years? And the resistance was overwhelming. That there was a whole group that went, we don't want any of this. What is this business? We want to stay exact. We're in charge. We control. We know how it works. And it just it didn't get off the ground. They boycotted the whole thing. A particular group, when there were a whole lot of others who wanted to be able to vision, wow, what could we do differently? How could we organize ourselves? And it was just the resistance to something new. So Juan Antonio, when I hear you saying, I know what you're talking about, resistance. But the great thing is that in Sao Paulo, there is already a model that can be used to say this works. So the future has a sort of an easier bridge, perhaps, knowing that in the region there is already something that's working. But I think the tension between what is and what can be is always a strong tension, whether we're talking, and especially in institutions. Institutions are big beasts to have to try and move, aren't they? So I think, as Alice said, this is the beginning of a conversation and more organization in the orchestral world of Latin America, for sure. I know Angelica's when we're in Europe at one of the conferences, she tried the same conversation. How do we bring more unity, solidarity? Luciana, talk to us, because there's a lot of students who will be listening here who have dreams of going and living and working in Europe. Talk to us about that.
You were saying, rightly so, that for us it's a lot of we remember home. We remember our culture. We were brought up with a lot of our culture, Latin American music in every musician's ear. We have a very musical continent, no doubt. So actually, that was actually how it started for me. We were doing a concert. It was the first opera ever that we have, Peris Euridice from 1602. And after that, we had an after party where the instruments, we didn't have access to the instruments. So it was just us. And we started singing a song that represented us, that was not necessarily a classical piece. And I remember the Greek singer, the Bulgarian singer, and then it was my turn. And I love Venezuelan music. I feel I have a lot of repertoire from Venezuela since childhood. And I sang a song from there. And the conductor remembered this. And she actually had a project in mind. She invited me to that. And it was so welcome. I had no idea. She didn't have any idea either. I think it was Emmy who recorded it finally. I don't know, but it was super hot suddenly. And then the word started spreading, and I have to say now I sing maybe 50% Latin America. I've seen a lot of Piazzolla, and I get asked in Norway to sing with the Symphony Orchestra in Oslo, or now I will also sing with Paulo in Lyon for Piazzolla's birthday. And I was just in Vienna singing in the Austrian television, also Latin American music, Argentinian, but it's more folk in this case. But the word spreads also. So I invite all the students that are listening, because that brought me also to Australia, just a programmer that realized that I could do classical and folk. And then I did Luciano Berio's folk songs in Australia. And it opens doors. It opens so many doors. It's fascinating. And the appreciation from the audience. I get a lot of feedback, warm feedback from Latin America, but also we were doing Maria de Buenos Aires in Bonn, in the Opera of Bonn, and we were supposed to have 3 shows, and it became 11 in 1 year. And now we were reinvited for New Year's, and because of COVID, it has been postponed. We're going to have 4 now in January. It has been postponed to February. Now it's postponing to next. We're trying to fit it in. But people really, because the theaters were full of people, they love it. I encourage everybody to please bring from their heart, from their soul, not to be shy and not to think that because we study classical music, that's all we can do. I feel we're very welcome to share all the other ingredients that makes us the artists that we are, that we become, because of our Western education and all the masters we find in Western culture, but not denying the enormous, rich, also oral tradition So yes, we have a problem that there is not scores for everything. There are not arrangements for everything, and they have to be made. So they have to be commissioned, and there is money there. And maybe it's not as easy in Latin America as it is maybe for the Norwegian Symphony Orchestra to commission arrangements. But they have asked me, do you have orchestral arrangements for Colombian music, for Brazilian, for Mexican? And I'm just a messenger from you. I also depend on that these arrangements get commissioned, and it's the responsibility also of Latin American programmers and the people that are behind in the organization to encourage these arrangements to be made, because they don't want necessarily an Austrian composer or arranger to make an arrangement of a Venezuelan piece. They want a Venezuelan composer or a Chilean composer to do this. And I believe in networking, and I believe this is a great moment to do it now with COVID, that we're all at home. We have our brains are burning, and we have the screen, and we can tap in. And now we're sitting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different countries, talking to people that are sitting in who knows how many other countries, and brainstorming together. And of course, there are good intentions, and then there have to be the economical possibilities. I guess the word lobbying, it doesn't really exist for musicians in government, but it's about time. Right now, it seems like culture, COVID is making it impossible for us, but I think soon, very soon, people will understand that it's the other way around. It has to be turned around. People are crying for live concerts. They really need it as much as we do.
Luciana, I'm going to jump because I had to go to the next part of the festival, but you are about to do Shéhérazade in Budapest, right?
And I bring my Buenos Aires with me. I bring Colombia.
That's what I want to say. Do you feel you will bring a Latin American spirit to Budapest?
I think we are what we have gone through. I fell in love with the 1001 Nights when I was 15. And Maria de Buenos Aires was a before and after, because I was doing Italian operas, French operas, and suddenly I could sing in my own language, and I could understand so much more in between. And for sure, it was a before and after, and it doesn't mean that I will sing Shéhérazade a Latin American way. It just means that I will sing it my way, and I have those colors undeniably in me. And I guess that's also why they wanted me to do it. So I encourage everybody to dare to get their unique self out there without the cliché. I swear to God, I will not go out there looking like Pocahontas, or I don't need to be the cliché. I think it gives us a power that we have to trust.
Brilliant. That's such a great note to come to a close on. The richness in this conversation today, and the opening to further conversation, and more than conversation, even the organization, and the solidarity coming together, and the valuing of what is already in Latin America, and making that more clearly available. I want to invite you all to the concert we're about to have now. I know it's getting late for you, Luciana, but still is Carlos Zamora's during lockdown. Angelica van Hoel decided she had to find a way that her artists were to survive and be financially viable during the pandemic. And she did many different things. And one of the things she did was she organized an online auction. So she got support from the auctioneer from Christie's, and did this online auction for different things of her artists. So Claudia Lepe did Canciones de Cuna, no? Lullabies, which was a beautiful book that was painter illustrated by her artist husband and has the QR codes, and and it was someone bought in the auction for their grandchildren this book, and someone else named two of the songs named after their two children, and so it was like a very creative way. And one of the other ones was a composition of a piece for lovers. So someone from Portillo, the wife of the couple that owned Portillo, she bought it as a surprise for her husband, who was also a clarinetist, who supports the festival. So Carlos wrote this 5-movement piece, and it's based on the different parts of the story of the hotel. And this man's been there for 70 years now, running it. So that's the piece we're going to listen to next. And it was beautifully prepared. The score is gorgeous, all boxed up, and it's called Sweet Portillo. And it's a contemporary piece that represents the 5 different aspects of life in Portillo, and he received that for Christmas. And it's been part of our programming as well. So it's very, very beautiful. We invite you to listen to it. People very moved by it. And the Quarteto Artes, a young quartet, which is primarily Venezuelan, living in Chile, recorded it. And so we get to see that today. I want to thank you all, the 3 of you. I think, this is just the beginning, and we could literally go on forever, but we're late, so we can't. Thank you so very, very much. Wonderful, wonderful to have you.
Arthur. Antonio.
Thank you very, very much. It's very enriching conversation. Arthur, we certainly have to talk.
Yes, certainly. Let's make sure that we keep in touch. Caroline, if you could share everybody's contacts, please.
100%.
Let's keep talking.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Luciana, great to meet you. It's been fantastic.
Pleasure.
Yes.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.